question. Yeah, if you were thinking, you know, how should I study for this exam? That's something we could talk about right now. Leo says not fun. Well, you're almost there, and then the cycle will probably start over again. Maybe you'll get like a week off in the middle or something. Um, so yeah, we've got an exam in a week. It'll be during our usual class time. You can read all of this at the top, but I'll just say it to you because you'll probably ask me about it if I don't. Um, so registered people, I'm asking to actually come to class to take the exam. There's a few reasons for that. One is it's for your own good. It will allow you to focus, right? Because if you're at home and somebody's like eating lunch behind you or something, it'll be hard to focus. You come to this nice room, it's big and empty. We can all enjoy each other's company together. No, but it'll allow you to focus. If you have any problems, for example, if Moodle crashes and you weren't able to submit your work, you can look at me with big scared eyes and I can say, don't worry, we can take it again, or we can try again, or we can figure out a solution together, right? So if you have some problem, we can work it out. And if you have any questions, you can ask me, right? I'll be on Zoom, so you can ask me on Zoom, but you know, it will solve some problems for us. It already has. I've given a couple exams this week as well, and there were inevitably problems. That being said, if you're registered fully remote, obviously take it online. If you are feeling unwell, take it online. If you're under quarantine, take it online. I know a lot of people are quarantined these days. I saw the official report. You guys probably got that same email, right? That there's like a lot of cases right now. Have you guys seen that? I think it's something like 40, which is not crazy, but it's also not a very happy number either, right? I think in the last few days there was some spike. Something's going on. I don't know what's going on, but anyway, so if you're under quarantine, please stay under quarantine. If you're fully remote, stay fully remote. But if you are happy and willing and able to come into class, please come into class. It will be on Moodle. There'll be two kinds of questions. One is quotation explanations. There'll be 10 of those. So 10 questions of quotation explanations. What is that? Is I'll give you a quotation. So maybe from this book, right? For example, I don't know. Maybe here's this quote. Somebody's offering somebody something, and he's like, "Hey, I insist." He says, "Well, if you insist, then give me a piece of land, not more than what would be measured in 3 strides of my feet." You know who that's talking about? Taking 3 steps of land. Does that ring a bell? Did we talk about that last class? Mahabali. Yeah, so the dwarf, right? Vishnu, when he's in the dwarf form, he's talking to Mahabali, and Mahabali offers him something, and he says, I'll just take these 3 small steps. So what is that testing? It tests, first of all, do you know who Mahabali is? Do you know who Vishnu is? I think he's down here. Do you know what's happening in this scene when they're talking to each other, right? Did you do the reading? Because if you did the reading, then you'll be able to remember this scene. If you didn't do the reading, you'll still hopefully be able to remember the scene if you just come to class and take notes. And so my goal is to reward those who did the reading. It'll be very easy to remember. But even if you didn't do the reading and you just took notes and have the book, then you'll also be rewarded and you'll probably do fine. So it'll be open book, it'll be open note. Okay, so even if you don't remember, you can look it up. You can think, oh yeah, something like that happened early on in the book, right? So even if you don't know everything, as long as you have kind of an organized note system, then you'll be able to find the pieces that you're looking for. And what else to say? It'll be timed, right? You'll have 1 class period to do it. So because it's open book, open note, you could get sort of trapped, right? You could think, oh, well, where was that? Where was that? And you'll spend the whole time looking it up. You can't find it. Then you're sort of causing a problem for yourself because you're running out of time, right? So that'll be a big part of this exam is time management. Is can you use your book and your notes effectively to answer the questions quickly? So there'll be 10 of those. Again, 75 minutes. So if you do the math and you only had these, you'd have about 7 or 8 minutes to do each one. But there also are 2 short essay questions. I'm going to give you 3 and ask you to pick 2 of them. So if you put all that together, 12 questions. it doesn't give you a ton of time. The quotation explanations are pretty quick. Let's just say very simple, 75 minutes. You want to spend 15 minutes on the short essay part. That would give you about 6 minutes for the quotation explanations. Maybe you want to spend a little bit longer, so more like 20 minutes, and then you could have 5 minutes for each of the quotations, something like that. It'll be up to you, right? You'll have to figure it out. But I encourage you to start thinking about time management, especially as you're taking the exam, if not earlier. As you can see, it'll cover everything we've done so far, weeks 1 through 7, mostly religion and society, the aims of life, Ramayana, right? So we're reading this, it'll definitely be on this, but also all the other stuff we've done. And, again, it's testing. Did you do the reading? Did you come to class? Did you pay attention? Did you take notes? And again, if there's justice in this class, which of course I'm trying to make it a just class, then you will do well if you do all those things. So here is a list of things that I think are important. One way you can study is if like scripture, you might be thinking, oh, what's scripture? What is that? What can I do with that, right? Go back to your notes, go back to the slides, right? The slides are all available for you to download. There actually aren't that many of them, right? So each of these are doubled. We've had 7 weeks, so there's probably like 14, maybe less, 12 or 13 slides that you need to go through. So scripture was the very first thing we went through, right? Scripture. So you can go back through this. Again, a lot of questions, right? He who knows one knows none. Why do you agree, right? You'd have to have notes from that day in order to fill in some of those questions. So this is how I would study for it. This is kind of chronological. Scriptures are the earliest part. White supremacy is toward the end. Sanskrit is early. Avatar toward the end. All these characters. Tevya was early. Hanuman, we haven't even talked about him yet. We'll talk about him on Monday. And then various books and lists and so forth. So it's chronological. Use the slides to your advantage, right? Those are notes that I created for you to help you understand the reading. And if you go to the slides and you can't understand the slides, then you can go to the reading, right? So sometimes I ask you a question and I give you a page number too, right? History versus timelessness. And then you can go back to Smith and read those pages. So anyways, you should have all the pieces you need to go really deep into any one of these topics. And again, it'll be up to you to figure out how deep you want to go, how much you want to know about each one. Questions right now? I'm happy to talk about the formatting. We could go over specific items. And I encourage you to go over this over the weekend, and then we can come back and cover it a little more on Monday too. Questions right now? Questions about the exam?
Okay, Professor, what kind of question can be asked about like Ahalya?
Ahalya. So she is a character in the Ramayana. Here she is, yeah. And so, for example, if we did a quotation identification, right? I think she was toward the beginning of the book. Ahalya's story is on page 19, right? There it is, Ahalya's story. I could find a quotation that talks about her. Maybe it wouldn't be said by her, but it could be said about her. So let's see. So here on page 21, somebody is saying, may you seek and join your revered husband and live in his service again. Let not your heart be burdened with what is past and gone, right? I could just give you that quote. I probably won't do this because that sounds a little bit hard. But you could think, okay, who is separated from their husband? Who is being asked to go rejoin with their husband? Who had a burden from the past, right? And if you go through these people, Ahalya fits that description. Other people kind of do too. Sita might sort of have a similar story too. So I probably won't use that for the exam, but it's that sort of exercise that I'll ask you to do, right? Is I'll give you a quotation and ask you a question about it. So who is saying this? Who are they saying it to? What are they talking about? Most of them will follow that sort of format. Another thing it could be is also talk about women, right? We did that last time. How are women depicted in the Ramayana? You could pick Ahalya and talk about her. I'm not going to force you to do that. You could pick Kaikeyi, you could pick Sita, you could pick Tataka, any of these other women and talk about them. Also, But because she is a woman, you could use her as an example for something else that you're discussing. So those are two different ways. How does that sound? Does that make sense? Yes, good. Other questions? Okay. Leo, question?
For the terms like English terms, Sanskrit terms, like the list of lists, I can just know like the definitions and where's each thing from. Like they do the Dharma from like Hinduism, like India, stuff like that, and also the definition of it.
So you're wondering, like, what exactly do I need to know, right?
I mean, not exactly, but the term like the term carried out through like a bunch of lectures. So are you asking just for the definition? Or are you asking from which religion? I don't know.
Yeah. So maybe Leo is thinking, but wait, Sanskrit? I don't know Sanskrit. I don't know the Sanskrit language. Are you going to ask me a bunch of terms about Sanskrit or something like that, right? So the formatting of this might make you nervous. And I don't want to call Leo out, but when I was an undergraduate, I was a chemistry major. Have I told you guys this before? And so I took a lot of like math and science classes. And in my math and science classes, it was very common for the teacher to say, here's what you need to know. Memorize this, learn this mathematical formula, learn this formula from physics, and then you apply it on the exam, right? And you have to figure out which formula to use in which circumstance. That's not what we're doing here, right? This is a humanities class. This is a religious studies class. And so studying for this will be a little bit different, right? I can't tell you every little detail that I want you to know. And in fact, I've been telling you every little detail that I want you to know all semester long, right? What I'm trying to give you are sort of general topics that I want you to know something about. Some are very specific. So for example, the Indus River. Why do we care about the Indus River? Does that ring a bell?
I think because India get his name from that river.
Yeah, exactly. It's a river in India. Am I going to ask you how long is the Indus River? Am I going to ask you, I don't know, like what countries are on either side of the Indus River? Am I going to give you a map and ask you where is the Indus River? Probably not. I guess I could give you a map and say where is the Indus River. But I think Drissa made a very logical assumption that the name India comes from this river. The name Hinduism also comes from this river. It's probably, if I ask you a question, it'll probably have to do something with the name of India or the name of Hinduism, because that's all we talked about in class, right? So that's a very small detail, but kind of an interesting one, right? Something like caste, we've said a lot of things about caste, right? And so like Leo said, it's good to have a definition. For example, could you compare caste and class? That would be a great question, wouldn't it? Right? That's something we've talked about a lot. But in some ways, what we have learned is exactly what is caste. In fact, there are these 4 pillars of caste. Actually, there are 8. We didn't get to cover the last 8 because we kind of ran out of time, but that's okay. I'll only ask you about these 4. They're the 4 castes themselves. They show up in the Rig Veda. In the Rig Veda, they show up in Wilkerson caste. Caste even shows up in the Ramayana, right? Caste showed up in sacred and profane. And so this is another way I could study is think, where do these show up, right? You could even sort of draw lines connecting them. Caste shows up really across many of these. And so some of them are bigger, some of them are smaller. And one big part of studying will be figuring out what exactly do you need to know, right? And that is something that I will have a pressure I will have to put on you, even if it is kind of an uncomfortable one. That is actually how life works, right? Is you have to decide what is important and what is not important, what is worth knowing and what is not worth knowing. And obviously, I'm leading you, right? By giving you these terms, I'm leading you. I'm giving you a key to open the door of the slides. But you can look back at the slides, right? You can see what did we cover with the Indus River? What did we cover with caste? This was like one slide on one day. This was like a whole week, right? And it will continue to be a theme we keep talking about. So yeah, that's part of the challenge, right? Is figuring out what you need to know here. So it's a good question, Leo. I appreciate you asking that. Other questions? Okay, I think that's enough time on that. Again, go over this weekend. If there are specific things like Indus River, for example, you can't figure it out, come to class Monday, we can talk about it. But I encourage you to go through the slides over the weekend and you can figure stuff out, okay? All right, so is 1:50. We have about an hour, yeah. All right, the aims of life. This is what we did last time. This is what I often do at the beginning of class, is we kind of do a little recap, right? Because I do ask a lot of open-ended questions. Why do I do that? Again, it's, you know, in line with Leo's question, it's to get you guys to think. You know what I mean? I'm not just here to fill you up like you're some sort of empty vessel. That's a very traditional way of teaching, is to say, I have all this knowledge and I'm gonna pour it into you like I am filled with knowledge and you are empty. I think you guys actually have a lot of knowledge and I'm giving you ideas to think about. And so I give you a lot of open-ended questions, but then we can recap at the beginning of class and sort of go over the main lessons that we derived from those open-ended questions last time. I believe we went through all of these. We just talked about Ahalia a moment ago, so maybe we don't need to go into this too much. I think one thing to keep in mind is she's almost presented as putting pleasure above everything else. Did you guys get that impression when you read it? But I still think we need to see her as a victim, right? Because she was punished for being a victim, right? She's a double victim. She's a victim of Indra, who came and tricked her. She's also a victim of her husband, who punished her for being tricked, right? So she really is a victim. Like we also just said a moment ago, Rama is very nice to her, right? He turns her back into a human, but also sends her back to her husband. And so that's not a really lovely prize that she got there. What about Queen Kaikeyi? We haven't talked about her yet today. How is she putting success over duty? Can anybody recap that for us? Question mark?
I think she wanted her son to be king instead of Rama, even though the king has decided that Rama should be the king.
Good. So, you know, as we've talked about before, Rama is the perfect man and everybody supported him in becoming king. But then Kaikeyi, especially after talking to her handmaiden, she was thinking, oh, it'd be better if I put my son on the throne. That'd be better for me. I don't want to get forgotten. And so it's easy to kind of blame her and say it's her fault because she was so selfish and she was putting her success, her pursuit of success over her duty as a mother, as a queen, as a wife, right? She's bad and it's all her fault, right? So that's one way we can interpret this situation, but it's not the only way, right? Another way we could interpret this Rama getting sent into exile, we could say that the king pursued pleasure over duty, right? How is that the case?
I think also the king has listened to his wife instead of like making the decision as a queen, but he didn't make the decision as a king. He just listened to his wife so he can get whatever he wants out of her.
Okay. And so, yeah, very simply put, that's absolutely right. He just listened to his wife. And we need to think too, why did he listen to his wife? If it got a little buried in the story, but I think it's important to pay attention, is when he wanted to marry her, he saw her and he thought, oh, this woman is so beautiful. I must have her. And of course, he's the king, so he can basically do whatever he wants. He makes a promise to her father and he says, look, if you let me marry your daughter, I will make our child, right, your grandson, I will make our child the king because he has many wives and he has many children, or potentially would have many children at that point. He makes a promise. He says, I want your daughter so badly, I will promise you anything. I will make her, will make her the queen. I will make her son the king, right? And so he makes this promise. He actually makes other promises to her too because he loves her so much. He's kind of his favorite. That he then puts himself in a situation where he's kind of stuck, right? So he writes checks that he can't cash, as they say. And then he's in this situation, just like Drissa was saying, where he has to either honor his promises that he's made to his wife, or be a good king and be a good father to Rama. And these kind of come into conflict with each other, right? So what happens in the end? Just like Drissa said, he fulfills his promise. He sends Rama away. Well, what happens to him? Does he live a long life after that? He did. I think you guys are probably gonna say that too. Yeah, so he dies, right? He dies, and we can think, why does he die? Again, he's just being pushed and pulled in different directions. His heart is broken over these conflicts. So you feel sorry for the guy, but he kind of caused it himself, right? Just like we were talking about. He pursued pleasure. He was sort of this irresponsible as a younger man, at least. So that's what's being argued here. So hopefully that's pretty clear. Sita and Rama, they're both very good, right? They just do what they're supposed to do, and that's that. So that's sort of, again, a recap of what we did last time. One thing we can think about is, how are women represented in the Ramayana? So, I could have put a question like that on the exam. That would be a good, like, open, interpretive question, and it will force you guys to think, all right, how are women represented in the Ramayana, right? And this is just part of the book, and you could pull from any one of these characters. You could also pull from other characters that we'll see a little bit later. But at this point, what would you guys say? What kind of representation do you see here? Have you ever heard of the I think this is how it's spelled, Bechdel test? I'll capitalize it. Bechdel. You heard that, Brendan? No? Anybody heard of this before? Is anybody Googling it right now? What is the Bechdel test? Is anybody out there? I know it's asking for a lot of effort to Google things. Why don't we can Google it together? You guys want to Google it together? Let's Google it together. Yeah, I did spell it right. What is the Bechdel test? Also known as the Bechdel-Wallace test, it's a measure of representation of women in fiction. It asks whether a work features at least two women who talk to each other about something other than a man. And the requirement that the two women must be named is also sometimes added. You guys heard of this before? What is this doing? Why does this matter? Why does the Bechdel test matter? I know maybe none of you have heard of it before, but I would argue it does matter. What does it do? Maybe we can ask a more simple question. Does the Ramayana pass the Bechdel test so far? Do two or more women talk to each other about something other than a man? Does that happen in this book?
I didn't see anything like this in the book yet. I mean, in my knowledge.
So Drissa can't think of anything. Can anybody else think of something? Jen says no. The women in the Ramayana are only talked about with husbands, no. Okay, Brendan's bringing up a good point. Kaikeyi talks to Kuni at one point. Do you guys remember this part, her handmaiden? So we've got two characters, both women, both named. So that's pretty close. The question is, do they talk about things other than men? You guys remember what they talk about?
They only talk about power, how to get in power.
They talk about power, that's right. And that does have to do with men. So that it's a little borderline, right? They talk a lot about Queen Kaikeyi and her future. So you could argue that, they talk about the queen and really her life, but it's also in relation to men, right? It's also like how she relates to her son, how she relates to Rama, her husband. So it's a little borderline. I would say for a story that's 2,000 years old, it's pretty good. But at the same time, really what this is asking is not just, are women represented? Because they are, obviously, right? You guys would totally agree with me. I would hope that women are represented in this book. this is asking another question, is how they're represented, right? So if a book or a movie or a story, if it passes this Bechdel test, what does it say about the way it represents women? How are women represented if it passes the Bechdel test? What does it say about women? It says that women have names, right? That women have relationships with each other, and that those relationships do not necessarily have to do with men, right? In other words, that women exist as humans, right? And not as just like appendages to their husbands or something like that. You see what I'm saying?
But Professor, in the whole book, it only happened at one point with Kuni and KKE.
Mm-hmm.
Beside these two, can we find any other part where the same thing happened?
It's a good question, Drissa, and I think the answer is no. I think, I could be wrong, but, as I think about how the rest of the book goes, I think the answer is no. And in fact, the scene where Kaikei talks to Kuni, it's still presenting women in kind of a bad light, right? It's basically saying, look how bad Kaikei is. She's so selfish. Look how bad Kuni is. She is so scheming and trying to change all, the good plans that the men have, right? They're kind of being depicted as, maybe villain is a little too strong, but just as negative characters in the story. So yeah, I think it does not pass, right? It's an interesting question, but I think it does not pass the Bechdel test. So, we're left with this same question: how are women represented in the Ramayana? And the Bechdel test helps us think about it. But what do you guys say? How are women represented in the Ramayana? If this were an exam question, would you be able to answer it?
I will say they're very subordinate to the men.
Okay. Subordinate. I think that makes a lot of sense. And so, Drissa, I'm going to push you a little harder. How would you support that thesis, right? So you just made an argument that women are depicted as subordinate. How would you support that?
I mean, I've seen that in every part when they're talking about women. I mean, when they're talking about power, it is all about men.
Yeah.
And anytime they're talking about women, they talk about them, about their beauty.
Mm,
So beauty to be subjected to men.
yeah. So they're objectified, right? They're seen as these beautiful women that are pleasing to the eye, for example, but maybe not totally rounded out as characters, right? As human beings. I think this is all true. Yeah, and again, it's a very old story. So another word that we've talked about before is patriarchy. This is definitely a book that is about the patriarchy, right? The men are in charge, the women are subordinate, just like Drissa was saying. And so you could call on any one of these stories, right? Any one of them. And if you were writing an exam answer, that would be a good approach. Just find something very specific. Talk about Ahalia's story, talk about Queen Kaikei's story, talk about some other story, and use it to support your argument. Does that make sense? So that is what your task will be on this exam, is to make, in the short essay part, to make an argument, then support it with specific examples. Okay, questions about that? Okay, so here's one woman we didn't talk about yet, Surpanaka. We didn't talk about her together, at least. Did any groups talk about her in the breakout session last time? Does anybody know who Surpanaka is and what her deal is?
Yeah, I think she's a Ravana sister.
Uh-huh.
And she also went to try to convince Rama to marry her.
Mm.
And when Rama refused, she went back to her brother and tried to convince him that he should come and get married to Sita, because she think that when that happened, Rama could fall in love for her. And when she failed, she managed, I mean, she tried to kill Sita and she also failed that.
Yeah, excellent. So she's a very important character in the story. And Drissa actually just summarized a lot of separate pieces of the story very nicely. So thank you for that, Drissa. She's a very important character, right? She kind of takes this early part of the book of sending Rama into the woods, into exile, together with Sita and his brother, Lakshmana. She shows up during this period and then kind of links it to the whole rest of the book, which we'll start talking about today. So let's look at this scene in some detail because it's kind of an interesting one. I guess, let's see, where should we begin? Why don't we start thinking about this kind of in general, this idea of an upstart. We talked about upstarts last time, didn't we? It's a theme really throughout this whole book. Do you guys remember what an upstart is? You can see this when I look things up in the dictionary, right? So it's a person who has risen suddenly to wealth or high position, especially one who behaves arrogantly. So this is somebody who challenges the social order, someone who challenges the caste system, right? Challenges the caste system, and people don't like it. People in power don't like it when people who are out, who don't have power, challenge them in the caste system, right? There are many different ways to enforce the caste system when this happens. One way is through violence, right? Which was very common in America throughout America's long history of slavery, right? Enslaving people. Whenever enslaved people tried to push back against their masters, they were often violently and cruelly punished for trying to do that. But it's not the only way. We also saw another story of an upstart who was being punished. You guys remember this? Mahabali. He was an upstart, wasn't he? How did the gods put him in his place, so to speak? How did the gods push him back down to his caste level? How did they defeat him? It was sort of violent, but it wasn't really violence, right? It was something else. How did they defeat him? He got stomped, right? How did they, because he asks to get stomped. He says, oh, you have one more step left. Put it on my head, right? How did they get him into that ridiculous situation? Yeah, stepped on his head, exactly. It was a trick, right? They tricked him. So this is another way to reestablish the social order, right? If upstarts come and try to challenge the social order, they need to trick them. So for example, if one of you tried to take my position as the teacher, I would feel very threatened and I would use my powerful brain to try to trick you into going back and sitting down, right? Something like that. And we see something kind of similar happening here, where Surpanaka is almost like a temptress. Temptress. So if we think about the way women are portrayed in this book, this is another way that women are portrayed. It's not positive, right? It's actually kind of it's an old objectifying, right? Just like Drissa was saying, objectifying way of depicting women. She's very beautiful. I guess why don't we read it and we can get a sense of it. So page 64. Again, if you have the physical copy, it's 64. If you have a digital copy, it's chapter 4, Encounters in Exile, chapter 4. You guys know what exile means, right? Exile. I think rather than doing the breakout rooms, we can sort of go through the story together. I think that'll probably be more successful today. There's actually a lot to go over, so we can just tell it to each other. But you guys need to participate. Driss is doing a great job. Brandon's here. Everybody else, talk more, because otherwise I'll send you to your breakout rooms as punishment. So anyways, they're in exile. What does exile mean?
Maybe we can explain it by an example.
Mm.
Let's say that if Donald Trump refuses to concede and he become like kind of, so we could just send him, let's say, send him to Russia. Instead of putting him in jail, we send him to Russia.
Yeah.
So that would be exile.
There's actually an example of somebody who is stuck in Russia right now. Isn't he Snowden? Isn't he stuck in Russia?
Yeah.
Yeah, maybe that's what Drissa had in mind. Yeah, Edward Snowden. So he's stuck in exile, right? And so it was kind of common back in the day. If you make the king upset or something, he would banish you. That's the word that Jen used, very good, is sending someone away from their kingdom, right? And of course, Rama was sent into exile. We learned that last time. He's there with his wife Sita. And so he's out there in the woods and he sees this beautiful woman, right? Just like we were saying, she's depicted as a beautiful woman at the bottom of 63. So one evening, he's out in the woods, out in the plants, a damsel of the utmost beauty. And he became wary. The damsel's anklets jingled at her feet. Now I'm on 64. When she walked, her eyes flashed, her teeth sparkled, her figure, waist, and bosom were that of a chiseled figure. Rama, even the austere Rama, was struck by her beauty. And then he says this, he says, "Oh, perfect one, you are most welcome. May you be blessed. Tell me who you are, where you have come from, who are your kinsmen, what are you doing? So accomplished and beautiful in this solitude. What is the purpose of your visit here?" Have you guys ever said this to someone? "Oh, perfect one, you are most welcome. May you be blessed." Have you ever rolled up to the club and tried that out before? Silence? No? Lol? No? Okay. Well, you know, you can add it to your bag of tricks. It's sort of a nice thing to say to someone. May you be blessed, right? I don't know if it would work these days. So the reason I was reading it in that kind of creepy way is because there's sort of you know, Rama's sort of trying to do some work here, right? What is Rama's doing? What is Rama trying to do here? How do you interpret this scene? Is he pushing her away yet, like in the image?
I think she looked like if she was in kind of pain, and Rama is acting like he just want to go to her and, you know, like ease her pain. That's
I think Drissa is giving a very generous reading here. He thinks Rama is just trying to help her and ease her pain. I'm reading this a little differently. I'm thinking he's attracted to her. I mean, he's struck by her beauty. She's standing there. They're smiling at each other. And at this point, right? At this point, he seems to be really attracted to her. And it's important to keep in mind, right? He's a king or he's a prince. Can he have more than one wife? Does it matter that he's already married? It does not matter he's already married, right? He could have another wife. They could get married. There's no problem with that. There's no like law against that, right? His father had multiple wives. He could also have multiple wives. So he initially might be thinking, hey, who's this lady? He's also thinking like, hey, what are you doing here? So Driss is right. There is some concern, like, you know, we're out in the middle of the woods. But I read this as him being kind of interested. And maybe both of these are coming out at the same time. Now, of course, he changes his mind, right? Why does he change his mind? Why does Rama change his mind? Or in other words, why does he stop being interested in Surpanaka? And just to be totally clear, she has another name, which is Kamavali, which is a little confusing. She kind of transforms from this one figure to another. But why does he stop being interested in her? What happens? What does he find out?
I think he found out she is not giving him the real name.
That's right. She's not giving the real name. He finds out that she's Ravana's sister, right? Why does it matter that she's Ravana's sister?
Ravana is a kind of demoniac person. He's an evil person.
Exactly. He's an evil person. He's a demon. And so that means she is also a demon, right? Of course, if you couldn't remember, Ravana is the one who took over the world, 10 heads, many arms, right? He's the bad guy. So that means she's also a demon. The next page, they start talking about caste. Actually, I think I put this on a slide, right? Why does caste matter? So she's a Brahmin, but she's also a demon and a Sura. And so this is kind of a story of endogamy, right? Did we talk about endogamy before? What is that?
It is marriage between the same
caste, right? So one part of caste, one thing we said, we quoted Ambedkar, who is this famous Indian political leader, that endogamy is the machine of caste? I forget exactly what he said, but it is an important tool of caste, an important pillar of caste, one might say, right? It's one of the pillars of caste. Why is endogamy important for castes? Just like Drissa said, it doesn't let people from different castes marry each other, marry across the caste. It keeps them separate from each other. And we see that happening here. Even though Rama is attracted to her, at least initially, he also sees her as a demon and somebody of another caste. And so it is creating a boundary there. You see this happening? So even though he's attracted to her, the caste boundary is more important, right? Endogamy is more important, so he rejects her. And that's what we see happening in this picture. She's very sad to be rejected. And obviously this is from a different artist. It's kind of, I hate to say it, but kind of racist, right? She becomes all of a sudden darker skin when she's very beautiful. She's lighter skin. You don't love to see that, but you see that happening here. For some reason, he's blue. And then what happens to her? Drissa already kind of explained for us. She tries to hurt Sita. She has this feeling like if she could get Sita out of the way, then Rama will be all hers. But of course, this is Lakshmana. I know lots of names, but this is the brother, right? The brother captures her and catches her in the act and then mutilates her, right? What does it mean to mutilate somebody? It's sort of horrible, but how does he mutilate her?
He cut part of his body part, like the nose and some other body parts.
Yes, yeah. So Drissa is more polite than I am, but it's really horrible. On 69, you can only see the nose in this image, but on page 69, he chopped off her nose, her ears, and her breasts, right? Really, really horrible. He's really just punishes her very badly. And again, in the old days, we could say in traditional society, it was a common punishment to cut off somebody's nose. It would be unthinkable now as being overly cruel, but lives kind of were a little cheaper, let's just say. People died a lot more easily. And so there were a lot of cruel punishments like this. Okay. I don't have a ton of slides for the next part. We sort of already summarized it. This is actually a very important moment, right? Because if he had killed her instead of mutilating her, it'd be sort of the end of the story, right? But like Drissa already summarized, she goes back, she convinces her brother that she should take Sita for her own. And I think Drissa already pointed this out. She also has in her mind, if her brother takes Sita, then she can have Rama. And again, if we kind of take a step back and think about these relationships, they're sort of parallel to each other. Can you see this? So I'll put it in the chat, but we have, again, this brother and sister who are attracted to this husband and wife. And they're sort of shadows of each other. Maybe one way to put this is through the language of discipline. I promise this will make sense in a moment. Do you guys consider yourselves disciplined? You disciplined, Brendan? Sometimes on a good day? What about you guys? Chat, are you guys disciplined? Are you disciplined? You're not proving that you're disciplined enough to pay attention in class, folks. All right, Joel's just coming out saying no. And some things yes, in others no. I will say yes. All right, just as disciplined. Okay, I like that. Now, I'm going to go out on a limb, and I'm going to say you guys are actually very disciplined. The reason many of you are saying no is because you live in a time, in a society where a lot is asked of you, right? You guys are asked to wake up in the morning, to read your books, to do your homework. You have a lot on your plate right now, and so you might not feel up to all of the tasks that are asked of you. But I'm going to, again, remind you that a lot of things are being asked of you. And I mean, I think you already know this. But at the same time, it doesn't mean you're not disciplined. It just means that you have many tasks you have to deal with. I would say, actually, you're all very disciplined. Just to make it to college, you have to be disciplined, right? Another place you have to be disciplined is sports, right? So how do athletes need to be disciplined? Are there any athletes in the room? You don't have to be on an official team. Okay, Collins is an athlete, and Kristen. Okay, what are you guys disciplined? How is discipline a part of being an athlete? You gotta obey the rules. What kind of rules? I have my own experiences with ultimate frisbee, but I would like to hear Kristen's and Collins and whoever else. You got to get well rested every night, which probably means going to bed early and not doing a lot of fun things, needing to respect your teammates and not making mistakes. So that's when you're performing on the field or on the court or wherever in the game, right? You need to focus and maintain that focus. And if you can't, then you're going to let your team down for sure. Have you guys heard of the stretch? Sounds easy, but hard to do every day? Yeah, stretching is hard to do every day, right? It takes a lot of discipline. It hurts, right? The definition of a stretch is that you are pushing your body to a place where it's uncomfortable. Put in the work, especially when you don't want to, making sure your grades are good enough to play, right? Yeah. I think, once we got this ball rolling, there's actually a lot of discipline that comes into being an athlete, being a student or being an athlete, and then put them together, student athlete. That's a ton of discipline. Have you guys heard of the Mamba mentality? Never heard of it? Chat, you guys know the Mamba mentality? Kobe. Yeah, exactly. Live by it. Yes, Colin knows. So what is the Mamba mentality? What does that have to do with discipline? What did Kobe do that made him special when it came to discipline? What time did Kobe wake up in the morning? And of course, he's gone now. Once upon a time, the number that I have in my head is 4 a.m. I don't know if that's true, but he was famous for being super disciplined, right? Because he wanted to win so bad. He would put in the work. He'd wake up super early in the morning, go to the gym before anybody else, get his shots in, get his reps in, do whatever he was getting in. And so this Mamba mentality is it's almost like a kind of a fancy way of talking about this same discipline. Perform the best of your capabilities all the time. Exactly. And a big part of that, first one in, last one out. Yes, exactly. The Mamba mentality. And so a big part of that is doing the work, right? It doesn't come down from the sky. It's saying you gotta want it. You gotta put in the work. You gotta wake up early in the morning. And honestly, it's true. Even for me, I've been experimenting with waking up super early during the pandemic because what the hell else am I gonna do? There are a lot of hours in the day. If you wake up at 4 in the morning, there are a lot of hours in the day, right? That's 6 hours before 10 a.m., right? And that's 6 hours of quiet time where New York actually is asleep and you can focus, and your neighbor who plays the violin and the kids who live above you are quiet. Everybody else is asleep. Like amazing things happen at this hour in the morning. So anyways, coming back to this idea of upstarts. Now, I probably shouldn't even talk about Kobe because he's passed away and it's not good to talk about the people who have passed this way, but let's just say hypothetically, I'm a very disciplined athlete and somebody from the other team, and again, this is a very patriarchal way of portraying a woman as a temptress. We're back to the temptress thing. But let's say a woman comes to visit me and she's a beautiful woman, and we spend the night together, and she says, "Hey, Bill, don't wake up at 4 in the morning to write your article. Just stay in bed and stay with me." I'm probably going to stay in bed. I'm going to be honest with you guys, right? And so when we see this scene of a celestial nymph or just some sort of goddess, some beautiful woman coming down to seduce a very disciplined hero, the good guys, the strong ones will stay up for the task, right? One way of putting it is Rama was able to keep his duty over pleasure. He was very attracted to this woman, right? But it would have gone against the dictates of caste, against the dictates of his duty. So he decides to say, you know what, the pleasure of staying with this woman would not be, it's not as important as my duty, as my caste. And so he refuses to go with her, right? But if we compare this to her brother, Ravana, and his attraction to Sita, that is not the case, right? When he hears about Sita, just hearing her name and her description, he gets pretty excited, right? In almost sort of a ridiculous way, to the point where he decides he has to have her, right? And that unfolds the rest of the story. So what is his plan? How does he plan to go capture Sita? He comes up with kind of an amazing plan. And again, there are ways of resolving conflicts by force, right, through violence, but he chooses not to. In fact, he uses kind of a weird excuse. He's like, why would I need to use violence against a mere human like Rama? I'm not even going to use violence. I'm going to trick him, right? So how is he planning to trick him? Again, we see another trick.
Yeah, he sent his uncle Makira. Okay, I forget his
Maricha.
name, but he
Yeah.
sent yeah Maricha. So he sent his uncle to distract Rama. So he went there and turned himself into a golden deer. When Rama saw the deer, she asked her husband Rama to catch the deer for her to be like a pet. So when Rama went to chase the deer, then Ravana came to take Sita out. And that's when the eagle man tried to stop him, and he killed the eagle and take Rama, away.
Very good. Yeah. So Driss is holding it down for the class. Maybe I'll have to ask somebody else to summarize the next part. But thank you, Driss. That was a wonderful summary. And just like he said, we've got Sita. She sees the deer, and maybe we can look at this carefully too, because it's sort of an interesting part, and a lot is happening, and it's very sort of subtle. It's a little hard to pick up exactly what's going on. So for example, on 82. We are on the Grand Tormentor for everybody's looking in the ebook. That's chapter 5. It's a few pages in though. So just like Drissa said, Maricha comes, he's in this form of this deer, and Sita sees the deer. And she says, there's an animal at our gate with a body of shining gold, and its legs are set with precious stones. It's a dazzling creature. Please catch it for me. And at this moment, we kind of see Sita and Rama, who initially were these really perfect characters, right? Up until this point, they've been pretty perfect. They start making mistakes. You guys notice this? So what mistake is Sita making in this moment? What if we use the same structure that we've been using throughout the class, as we've been reading this book, what sort of mistake is Sita making here? Or Rama? They're kind of making it together, actually. What do you guys say?
I think now she is giving kind of order to Rama, and Rama is also kind of not following, like he's kind of falling, like let's say, listening to his wife and taking order from his wife.
Yeah, so we can see it this way is that Rama is just listening to his wife and doing whatever she tells him to do. And I think that's definitely true. And there's more we could see behind it too. So if we think about ideas like pleasure and the pursuit of pleasure, maybe I'll call it the pursuit of pleasure. Actually, that's what I call it over here. There's sort of a danger behind pursuing pleasure. Do you guys ever think of pleasure this way? Is pleasure dangerous? It's a weird way of thinking about pleasure. But it's true, honestly. So for example, Surpanaka was very attracted to Rama, like, oh, so attracted to him. I can't go on without him. She's so overcome by her attraction to him, right? And this is a theme we see again and again. Actually, many characters are totally overcome by their attraction, but this one gets her in trouble, right? She gets mutilated as a result of her attraction. Obviously, Lakshmana comes in and she's violent and all these other things. He's violent, she's violent. And so, it's not a simple situation, but we could say it kind of starts with her pursuit of pleasure. It leads her to this dangerous situation. The same is true for this deer, right? Sita sees the deer. It's almost like, I don't know, have you guys ever been at a carnival? It doesn't have to be in this very specific romantic situation, but sometimes, maybe we could fall into these same gender norms or whatever, but let's say the girlfriend sees the nice prize and the boyfriend says, I'll win that for you, honey. You guys know what I'm talking about? And then these carnival games are often rigged and you can actually never win them. Have you guys ever been in this situation before? The claw game is a classic one. You guys know the claw game? You move the claw and you can't actually get the thing that you want. There's something very similar happening here, right? Again, very stereotypical presentation of women as being desirous, right? Wanting things. Here we have Sita wanting this golden deer. And it's really that want, right? That desire, pursuing that desire that gets her in trouble. And Rama doesn't stop her, right? Rama falls into the same trap, but rather than wanting the thing, he wants to make his wife happy. He wants to pursue this thing, right? There's sort of a lust in the hunt. I'm not much of a hunter, but I imagine if I ever did go hunting, I'd probably get pretty into it, right? I'd try to like chase after the deer, and once you get it, you get really excited, right? There's sort of this bloodlust, that kind of thing that happens, and we see that happening here too. Rama gets lost in the hunt to the point where he's not even paying attention anymore. Both of them, actually, Sita gets lost and Rama gets lost too. The only one who can see straight is Lakshmana, right? And he's telling them that they're all idiots. He's like, you guys are both dumb. This is clearly a trap. Nobody's listening to me, right? And he gets kind of frustrated by this. And so this goes on. Rama's chasing the deer. Eventually, Maricha makes it sound like Rama's in trouble, right? He's calling for help. And Lakshmana is still saying, no, this is not the time to go. And he's protesting. And then eventually Sita says something kind of odd. I wrote it here in the slides. I guess I can copy it in the chat. This is the part that I think is sort of subtle and it's easy to miss. So she's saying, it is improper for you to stay here with me and talk coldly this way. She's talking to Lakshmana. Strange, anyone who's been close to my lord for even a brief moment ought to be prepared to lay down his life for him. Keeps going. If you don't want to save him, the only thing left will be for me to build a fire and throw myself into it. And this is something I think we talked about at the end of class. Maybe not everybody was there for that conversation. But again, Sita is threatening to kill herself on this fire, right? Why is she doing that? Why is she threatening to kill herself on a fire? It feels like kind of a ridiculous situation, right? What is she so afraid of? Why is she making this threat? Can anybody figure this out? Again, it's very subtle. It's a little hard to figure out. So if you can't, I'm not going to blame you, but I'm curious to hear your thoughts on this. Why is she threatening suicide here?
I think when the deer guy starts crying out for help, Sita thought that Rama was in problem. So she was begging Lakshmana to go save Rama. And Lakshmana already know that was a trap. So he didn't want to leave Sita alone. Then Sita started threatening him that if he doesn't go to save Rama, she will commit a suicide.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And so as we look at this scene, she says it's improper for you to stay with me, talk coldly this way. Just like Drissa is saying, Rama's life is in danger, right? And that's what she thinks. And for all she knows, that is the case. Maybe this is an important question. What would happen? Let's say something bad did happen to Rama. Let's say he does die in a hunting accident, and that sort of thing did happen, right? Hunting is dangerous. Sometimes hunters shoot each other. Sometimes animals hurt a hunter, especially back in the day. Sure, there were like lions and tigers and all sorts of stuff. Maybe not lions, but definitely tigers. So all sorts of dangerous things all around. He could have been in trouble. It's definitely possible. Let's say something did happen to Rama. What would Sita do? What would her fate be in this traditional society? Well, she'd probably throw herself on the fire. Yeah. So that was a common practice, is that when women's husbands passed, they would often throw themselves on fires. And that, again, is what she's threatening to do here. Another thing that women do sometimes, she could go to her father's home, right, and just stay with her parents. She could marry her husband's brother. And so, in biblical times, this was pretty common, right? If, let's say I'm a woman, my husband dies, rather than be alone and a widow and have to take care of just myself, then I might marry my husband's brother, right? That was pretty common, and you could stay in the same family. So there's a little, it's very subtle, but there's a little implication here that, if Rama is out of the way, then she and Lakshmana could be together. right? And again, she doesn't come out and say that. She doesn't come out and accuse him of that, but she makes it very clear that if anything happens to Rama, I'm gone. I'm not staying with you, Lakshmana, you creep, right? So go get out of here and go save my Rama. Now, of course, he's not being a creep. He's just trying to tell everybody that it's obviously a trap, and she kind of accuses him of coming on to her. So again, very subtle. It's a little hard to see that here. Maybe I'm reading into it a bit much, but I've read other scholars interpret it this way too. So in any case, we have all these examples of pursuing pleasure and all the dangers that come from it. Maybe this is worth asking, is there a proper way to pursue pleasure? How do we avoid the dangers of pursuing all of these pleasures? Okay, Brennan says be rational. How do you be rational? Like in the case of the deer, for example, let's say you're Rama. How do you be rational in that situation? Don't do that. Just say, you know what? We're going to let that golden deer go. We can have the next golden deer, right? This one seems a little dangerous. There's no other way. Again, pleasure is one of the three aims of life. And so it's not always obvious here, but I think in the background, for example, Sapanaka and Rama, he could have given in to his pursuit of pleasure, right? He's very attracted to her. He could have tried to be with her. But again, that'd be against his duty. So by keeping his duty, he was able to protect himself, right? Ravana's attraction to Sita, however, we'll see in a moment, he is willing to put that pleasure, that pursuit of pleasure, over all other things. Rama and Sita were able to put their pursuit of pleasure over being rational, right? Like Brendan was saying, over sort of reading the situation, like Lakshmana was warning them. So this is something we'll see again and again. The pursuit of pleasure at the expense of these other pursuits is dangerous, right? That is a takeaway message from the story. And we see that here, right? Ravana finally comes to see Sita for the first time. The next page on 85, again, the same chapter. And he's just so awestruck. He's just like, oh my God, look at her. She should be mine. Maybe I'll read the part before that. He was overwhelmed by the vision before him. Sita invited him in, gave him a seat while his mind buzzed with 1,000 thoughts. She should be mine. I'll make her the queen of my empire and spend the rest of my days obeying her command and pleasing her in a million ways. I'll do nothing else in life except enjoy her company. And he keeps going on, right? This is like, so he's so excited. He's like, oh, I'm so excited just by being near this woman. Have you guys ever felt this way before? Have you ever seen someone and thought, oh, I can spend the rest of my life just trying to make this person happy. I love this person so much, I can't stop thinking about them. You guys ever felt this way before? We talked about love at the beginning of class. Like in the beginning, at the beginning of the relationship, it often does not last, right? This sort of love, it arguably cannot last. Okay, so Leo's calling it lust, yeah. I think that's true. Yeah, I think that is a good word for it, right? So what does lust mean? Again, in this language of the pursuits, the aims of life, it really is putting this pleasure, right? This pursuit of pleasure over all other things. That really is a defining feature of lust. And sometimes there are even legal consequences or professional consequences or whatever consequences, but in that moment when we are totally kind of geared up with this lust, it's hard to see past it, right? One issue with this is it's not consensual, right? There's no consent. It's not a mutual love. It's just a single feeling from one side, and so that also makes this a bigger problem. It's more like an obsession rather than mutual love. But if it becomes mutual, it also is sort of like that soulmate conversation we had earlier on, right? We read, we did the love song project where we thought about turning this love into something more beautiful, more transcendent. And in our society, I think we do have a special place for this kind of love if it's under the right circumstances. But again, in the old days, in traditional society, this is wrong, right? It is wrong to have this really strong love that overcomes all of your other pursuits, right? This would be a mistake. Even if it is consensual, it's a mistake. You always want to keep your duty and your pursuit of success over your pursuit of pleasure. It's almost like that Jay-Z song about all of his problems. And so in the end, this is Ravana's downfall, right? Is pursuing this incredible lust, this incredible desire at the expense of his professional success, at the expense of his duty, right? Okay. Are there other things to talk about? There are a ton of details that we aren't able to cover. He captures her, of course. There's a curse. Maybe that's what we're talking about. There's a curse. What's the curse on page 87? You guys pick up on this? It's a very minor detail, but it's sort of important for the plot. I'll just read it to you. There's an ancient curse that if Ravana touched any woman without her consent, he would die in that instant. So he dug the ground under Sita's feet, lifted it off with her, and placed it in his chariot and sped away. Obviously, this picture, he's not doing that. But why does this curse matter? What does that tell us about Sita's fate? Why does this curse matter? Well, it'll make sense as we keep going through. He cannot force himself upon her, right? If Sita doesn't want him, even when she has been captured by him, he cannot force himself on Sita. And that obviously is important information for Rama and for the story. Obviously, it's important for Sita and her fate here. And so, again, this is kind of the next scene, is now Sita has been captured. Have you ever heard of a story where a princess gets captured by a bad guy and a good guy has to go save her? Tons of stories, right? And I'm not going to say that this is like the first time that's ever been done. Arguably, the Iliad is a similar story, right? A princess gets captured by another army and the army has to go and fight them. But this version where you have like kind of a demon coming and capturing the princess, you see it in Super Mario, right? You see it in lots of other stories, fighting against the dragon to save the princess. So it's a pretty classic image. I think a lot of it is tied to this. Stories like this did have a way of moving around the world, especially over the last 2,000 years. So let's start with the animals. We only have a few minutes, but we can start with them and then we'll pick up with animals next time. So I would argue this is caste. So as we keep reading about animals, I want you to think about caste. Caste is built on a hierarchy, right? Like we talked about before. And here we've got horses and cows are at the top. Monkeys and bears are kind of in the middle. And dogs and crows are at the bottom, right? So are there any dog lovers or owners in the house? Dog people? Brandon, you got dogs? All right, Brennan has dogs. So why do you think dogs are at the bottom? Can we make sense of that? Again, I don't mean to offend any dog lovers, but this is the way they're presented here. What about dogs? Put them at the bottom here. What do you think? Horses and cows at the top, dogs and crows at the bottom. They're easily accessible. Dogs are seen as scavengers. Aha, interesting. Yeah, what do dogs eat? Have your dogs ever eaten weird things, Brendan? Yeah. They literally eat anything. Yeah, you don't have to horrify us with gross stories, but yeah, they literally eat anything. And like Anthony's saying, this word scavenger is key. And maybe he's thinking crows too, right? Crows are famous for eating dead things, right? And you could imagine if a dog lived outside, a stray dog or something like that, they probably eat just about anything. Would you guys agree with me? What do horses and cows eat? What do horses and cows eat? Grass. Herbivores, right? Grass, pretty straightforward. Monkeys and bears, what do they eat? fruit and stuff, food. They eat a lot of stuff. They actually eat things very similar to what we eat. Have you ever thought about this? Bears kind of famously break into human houses to eat all their delicious foods and stuff. But they generally don't eat like dead things, right? They just eat sort of live, delicious things. So yeah, this really, Anthony nailed it. This really does come down to food. And we talked about the pillars of caste: purity and pollution. Remember that? And how as humans, we want to eat pure things, right? The 5-second rule, is that allowed? Is that not allowed? In, very traditional society, that's not allowed. If anything falls on the floor, polluted, dirty, bad, don't eat it, right? And we could say it's biology because of bacteria and whatnot, but I think it's more of a ritual thing where it's just your feet, remember, your feet are dirty, your mouth is clean. Remember Purusha, the whole thing? And we see something very similar happening here. Horses and cows, they eat clean, vegetarian food. They also help us. We can ride them and they can give us milk. Maybe you've heard cows are sacred animals in India and it's taboo to eat them, right? And there's a reason for that, is because vegetarian diet, very pure, very clean. They also feed us and give us milk, just like our mothers, right? There's something very significant about that. And then on the other end of this would be the impure beings that don't differentiate between foods, right? This is really what it comes down to, is dogs cannot see the difference between what is pure and what is impure. And because of that, they are put at the bottom of the hierarchy. But you guys can still love your dogs. I don't mean to hate on dogs. Like not sacred because split hoof, which is why Muslims don't eat it. Could that be related to this? Yeah, Leo, that's an interesting question. I don't know enough about Islam to really make a statement on that. I've heard the talk of the hooves, and if you look at was Deuteronomy in the Bible, I think it's Deuteronomy, one section of the Old Testament, or Leviticus, I think it's Leviticus. There's talk of different rules about what is clean and what is pure, impure. I think this language of purity and impurity is definitely part of the question. Why is one pure, impure? I'm not going to speak for a whole tradition. I will say this category of dog as not separating what's pure and impure and just eating all different things, pigs do that too, right? Again, I'm not a farmer. I don't know a ton about pigs, but pigs eat everything also. So that could also be part of this conversation too. But there's a whole host of other impure things, particularly in Leviticus, that it's a little hard to make sense of what the logic is, So it's an interesting question. Why are pigs impure? I don't really know, but the fact of the matter is they are for a lot of communities, but not in for Hindus, right? Hindus don't eat beef, Muslims don't eat pork, and so there was a kind of a tasteless ad for lamb, where like everybody agrees that lamb is good there, right? It's from like a lamb company. Okay, we are out of time, so let's pick up with animals next time. We're going to talk about monkeys who get into a fight, Vali and Sugriva. So if you haven't read that section yet, we'll talk about monkeys next time. Impure as in like why Muslims don't eat them. Yeah. So basically Leo's question is, why don't Muslims eat pork? I can't answer that definitively, but I think it does come back to this idea of being clean and unclean, pure and impure, because they roll in the mud. Yeah, and mud is a nice way. Yeah, we find them dirty. Okay. So I take that to mean Zamo is Muslim and he's speaking for Muslims. So yeah, exactly. This idea of dirty, impurity, those are very similar concepts. They don't take care of themselves. Yeah, and when they eat, they don't differentiate between pure and impure foods too. Makes sense to me. Okay, shall we call it a day? It is 2:52. We're out of time. Any questions about anything?